Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of October. Before we start, I must say that very bad news are coming from the front lines for both parties, for the Russians and for the Ukrainians as well. And if we're talking about the Ukrainians, of course, we understand that the worst thing that might happen with the Ukrainians is that the Elon Musk decided to stop providing the satellite internet for the Ukrainian military forces. This is very bad news because we understand that that was like the game changer from the Ukrainian side, this internet and so on. And of course, we understand that if the Ukrainians are planning to start anything in the very nearest future, like any offensive operation, we understand that without internet, without the Elon Musk internet, the chances that they will be defeated become higher than if they have this internet. Of course, we understand. This is the bad update from the Ukrainian side. If we are talking about the Russians, there are also very bad news from the Russian side. And the first one and the most important one, of course, I believe that the people who are not connected with Russia, with Belarus, with Ukraine, if you're from Western countries or something like this, you don't understand this, but you understand, you will understand as I tell you, but I believe that you haven't heard anything about that. Today we got a very interesting report that the Russian military authorities started hunting for the military journalists who are working on the front line. You know that who has signed on my Telegram channel. I usually update some videos, and this is not my videos. I'm talking about some short reports from the front line. I'm taking this video from some closed channels of Russian journalists, and most of these people, sometimes I take their information, trying to understand and analyze their information. They're under Russian hunting. And the thing is that the Russian military authorities decided to do this for many reasons, of course. And one of the official reasons the military authorities are saying they're doing this because of previous reports about the Russian military tactic and strategy in Kharkiv region, in Kherson region. You know, when the Russians started stepping back, I believe that Military Summary was the only one channel, the only one, I don't know, military expert who are saying that the things that the Russians were doing is the best thing they could do. Because I had told you many times a lot about Mongolian tactics, warfare, about the things about the territories, about the tactics. So I was, to tell the truth, I followed a lot of channels. I was the only one who was saying that the Russians made a very nice and perfect decision in those situations. And most of the Russian Telegram channels were saying totally opposite thing. They were saying that the military authorities are stupid, that they're doing bad things, that they're leaving their territory, that it's like that tomorrow the entire Russia is going to collapse. And so there were a lot of panic. And according to the official military authorities' positions that you can see right now, the Russians started punishing these journalists for that panic because they dealt much more damage to the forces than even the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. But this official position of the military authorities, but I believe that it's the official, but there is, we can say, another side of the coin. And the thing is that I believe that the Russians understand that something very important, something very huge is going to happen in Kherson district, in this area. And I believe that the Russians, for now at least, from these things that they're doing with these journalists and so on, with Elon Musk as well, because you need to understand, it's totally my opinion. I believe that some of you believe in that will try to tell you right now. Somebody are not believing this, don't believe in this. But I think that Elon Musk stopped providing the Ukrainian service with the satellites because he understands that the Russians are able to shut down his satellites easily. It's my opinion. It's up to you to believe or not, or you can have your own opinion about that. Somebody can say that Elon Musk is just a businessman. He understands that it's a very big money, $400 million. That's a lot of money, of course. And the question is, why should he provide these services for free if if some factories, military armor factories are getting money for this. Maybe this is like the real situation, but my opinion that there was some kind of conversation, of course, between Elon Musk and some authorities from Russian Federation, and they let him know that if he are not planning to stop doing this, his satellites will be shut down. It's my opinion. Anyway, we see what we see, and the fact is that he decided to stop doing this. Of course, now he is talking about some payments from the United States military authorities and so on. So we'll see, we'll follow the situation. But anyway, if you need to understand two important things, there is a lot of things that we can talk about. Insurance and so on, and responsibilities. And one thing, when you're providing these services for free, and if the Russians start shutting down these satellites, the question is, what will be these expenses covered by anybody from the Musk side? And if we're talking about some paid services, and if the services are paid by the United States military authorities, we understand that there should be insurance, and of course there is like totally different responsibilities and so on. So this is the question, and I believe that Elon Musk just wants to solve this question as well. So he wants to be on the safe side. We can understand him. But now let's get back to Kherson district. Today I got a very interesting update that from the Russian authorities that some people, I believe spies in Nikolaev, reported that they mentioned big convoys of Ukrainians in Nikolaev. They were moving to the front line in this area through Nikolaev. This morning I got report that there are around, if we're talking about Kherson district, there are around 60,000 soldiers from the Ukrainian side. So we can calculate the distance of the front line in this area. The distance is around 146 kilometers, let's say 150 kilometers in this area. So we can say that if the Ukrainians have around 60,000 soldiers in this area, so we can say that there are around 400 soldiers per 1 kilometer. And believe me, that's a lot. That's really a lot, and we understand that it's not even offensive state of the front line from the Ukrainian side. This is the real storm state. The Ukrainians are planning to storm something, because if we will try to calculate the front line, the front line that used to be in Kherson district, this front line is much higher. It's much higher in this area. Something around 200 kilometers and even more, with all those like banks and so on. So we understand that the front line in Kharkiv area was, there are 2 arrows in this area, so 180 kilometers, another, so something around more than 200 kilometers. And if we're talking about this area, it's 150 kilometers. And if we are talking about Kharkiv area, there were around 70,000 soldiers, and if we're talking about Kherson, there is just 60,000. The front line is less than in Kharkiv area. So we understand that the Ukrainians are planning to do something. And furthermore, a few days ago, I told you that we got report from the Russians that they are planning to start evacuation of Kherson. That the governor of this area reported about starting evacuation from this area, but the situation, this thing is not so easy as you can say, as you can understand. First of all, the Ukrainians are no longer able to use this bridge. It's impossible to do evacuation through this bridge, and through this bridge that in Yekakhovka as well. These bridges are destroyed, and these bridges are unsafe for civilians for usage. The only one way how to evacuate through Kherson is the boats that are moving from one bank of the river to another. But today the Russians reported that during the day, I believe that Ukrainians are able to evacuate, the Russians are able to evacuate just 8,000 people. 8,000 civilians. If we're talking about Kherson and about the population of this town, before this conflict there were around 300,000 soldiers, and after this conflict started there are around 200,000 of Ukrainians or the citizens of the Russian Federation, we can say for now on, and plus minus some refugees and so on. So 200,000 of people. And if we are going to split this number for 8,000 people per day, we understand that the Russians need around 25 days to evacuate Kherson. So it's impossible. It's highly unlikely. They can start this process, but we understand that they are not able to complete this mission before something. And now let's try to understand. First of all, Musk decided to shut down the internet. The Ukrainians accumulated around 60,000 soldiers in this area. The Russians reported about evacuation of Kherson. I believe that the Ukrainians are planning to storm this town. This is going to be their final battle for this year, and they do have real chances to do this because if we're talking about Zaporozhye, this area, the south, it's a very nice option for the Ukrainians trying to split this area into parts and so on. But the thing is that anyway, even by attacking in these directions, the Ukrainians won't be able to do one important thing. They won't be able to reduce the Russian support in this area. And anyway, the Russian forces in this area will receive a lot of armor, a lot of shells, a lot of reinforcements, everything they need to stop the Ukrainians and to defeat them. So anyway, it's like attacking the wall. And the question is, do you have enough of power to break this wall if we're talking about the attack in Zaporozhye? If we're talking about the north of LPR, the thing is that this is some kind of useless waste of time, I believe, because if we take a look at the north, there are no towns in this area. The only one thing that can bring some value for the Ukrainians is to cut off this railroad that moves through Troitsk, this one, to Starobielsk and so on, because the Russians are using this railroad to support and supply their forces in LPR. But the question is, should the Ukrainians pay such a big price just for one purpose, to cut this railroad? I believe they shouldn't do this because anyway, the Ukrainians were pretty successful by destroying the Crimea bridge. So I believe that if they want, they are able to destroy this railroad at many places they want to do this. That they can destroy this bridge on the territory of Ukraine or LPR, that they can destroy this railroad on the territory of Russian Federation. I believe they can. So in this case, they will maybe they will receive some media victory and they will receive a lot of losses. If we are talking about Zaporozhye, the situation is the same. They need to attack the wall. They need to be sure for 100% that they are able to take this power plant, and at the end of everything they need to be sure that even if they are able to penetrate this defense line, even if they are able to reach the town by the name of Energodar, they need to be sure for 100% that the Russians haven't moved so much supply and so much forces on the territory of this power plant. They need to be sure that the Russians haven't done this, because if the Russians have moved so much forces, a lot of people, equipment, food, and so on, believe me, the Russians will be able to hold this fortress, even not for 1 year, maybe for years they will be able to hold there and not to allow the Ukrainians to attack this area. Meanwhile, the Russians will be able to solve all issues and start some counteroffensive operation. So attacking Energodar is too risky from the Ukrainian side. And the only one thing that the Ukrainians do have can reach, and this win are able to bring them a lot of benefits and success, is to attack Kherson. Because if the Ukrainians are able to ruin Kherson and to push the Russians on, we can say, east side of the Dnieper River, that means that the Russians, in this case, will lose the only bridgehead that they have on the left or on the west side of Dnieper River. What does it mean? That means that, believe me, hardly unlikely that the Russians will be able to cross this river in the future if they lose the bridgehead near Kherson. And everybody understand that if the Russians have the bridgehead on this side of the river, that means that they still have a lot of chances, and the chances are very high to attack Nikolaev, and the most important, to attack Odessa. So this operation can bring a lot of benefits for the Ukrainians. They need to and they can do this. They are very close to Kherson. Let's try to calculate the distance. For example, if we're talking about the distance from the front line to Kherson, it's like 90 kilometers. So they have already possibilities to ruin this town by the artillery. I'm not even talking about the HIMARS system, because they still can use the old Soviet systems and so on. So this is the only, I believe, from logical perspective, from understanding of the value and the price that they need to pay, this is the best option. Furthermore, we understand that the Russians, even if they can use this bridge, Antonovka Bridge, I believe that they can use this bridge for 10 or 20% from its real power that they could use in the past. The only one way how to support Kherson the Russians have is just building the boats. There is a pontoon bridge. There is a pontoon bridge in this area, but we understand that if the Ukrainians start their offensive operation, counter-offensive operation during Kherson, these bridges and pontoon and Antonovka bridge will be destroyed immediately. Immediately, the Ukrainians will launch as much as possible missiles with one purpose: to destroy the supply and logistic roads. So that's why we understand that Kherson, it's a fortress. Today there was a few reports from Ministry of Defense from the head of Ukrainian Army, Zaluzhny. He reported that this is a fortress, that the Russians prepared a real fortress in this area, and to take this town, the Ukrainians will pay a very high price to take this town. Very high price to take this town. And we understand that the Russians also are not planning to evacuate, because this is the capital of Kherson district, the Kherson region, that is already a part of Russian Federation. So it's highly unlikely that the Russians will make the same decision in Kherson as they did in Balaklia, when they just decided to let's fall back without even clashes for this town. They can't do the same thing with Kherson. There are around 200,000 people. And believe me, if these people are not able to evacuate, and if Ukrainians comes, I believe that they will start doing some, massacre in this town. Anyway, they will do this. Because it's like they did this before. So I believe that they will do the same, and they can do the same. And maybe they will, at least if we're talking to those people who were supporting and working with the Russians and who couldn't leave this town. Of course they will do this. So this is the first area that Ukrainians will try to storm. They have 60,000 soldiers. I don't have the number of the Russians in this town, how much force, how many force, what is their number in this town. But I believe that they have 20,000-30,000 in this area. And there is another front line. There is a Berislav front line, this town. And this is very important fortification site from the Russians as well. Because these two towns, and as you can see, the front line in this area is not stable. It's like soft, and there is places where communication between these two towns can be like cut off. For example, if the Ukrainians are able to attack and penetrate the Russians and to reach this area, they will cut the supply between these two towns, and then the Russians will have to solve two puzzles: how to support Kherson and how to support Berislav. These two important areas, and the Russians are not planning to give up and to step back from this town. And there is another important town in this area. This is like the head of triangle, so this is the bottom of triangle, and there is a head of triangle by the end. The town is by the name Snegirivka, this one. And as you can see, this is the Russians' defense triangle, and this is the area where the Russians are planning to stop the Ukrainians and to do whatever they need to do just with one purpose: to save this bridgehead. Because if the Russians are able to hold this bridgehead, that means that in some time they are able to start offensive operation with their army in direction of Nikolaev. The Russians understand one important thing. The Ukrainians understand that the only thing they can do is to attack Kherson. They will ruin this town. Don't have any doubts about this question. The storm operation of Mariupol was a fairy tale in comparison with the things that Ukrainians will do in this town if they decide to attack Kherson, because they don't have any other options. And if the only one option for them to reduce this town to ruins, they will do this because they need to push the Russians on another side of Dnieper River. Anyway, don't even think that any building will survive during the upcoming storm operation. Don't even think about this. Nothing is going to survive there. Only if the Russians are able to defeat the Ukrainians. And the Russians understand this situation as well. They understand that Ukrainians are planning to involve around 60,000 soldiers army. That's a lot. And they understand that if they're able to defeat them, and if they are able to reduce their own losses, that means that they are able to start counter-offensive operation and to take Nikolaev for 100%, and to storm or maybe block Kryvyi Rih from the south. And if we're talking about Kryvyi Rih, this is the town of President of Ukraine, Zelensky. He was born there. This is his native town he were living in. So it's also a very tasty piece of cake for the Russians if they want to make some problems or to make some immediate victory from their side. So the situation about Kherson are very critical. If we are talking about the previous 24 hours, the Russians reported that during the previous 2 hours, as I told you, there was a lot of convoys and of forces moving in the direction of Nikolaev. The Russians spotted them, attacked them with rockets and artillery and so on. And the Russians reported that as a result of those attacks, the losses among 59th Brigade and 14th Legion were more than 170 soldiers and 13 armored vehicles. Let's start talking about Nikolaev. If we're talking about the Frontline, Nikolaev, Kryvyi Rih Frontline, this area between Snigirivka and Dutchany, because the south of Dutchany is still in the Russians. In this area, the Ukrainians made few attempts of counter-offensive operation, but they were defeated and their losses around 130 soldiers and 21 armored vehicles. Very interesting update we received today from the town by the name of Vremivka. This town, according to the Western sources map, as you can see, these two towns like Niskushna and Vremivka is under Ukrainian control. But if you take a look at the Russian sources map, you're going to see that Niskushna is under Russian control. And today, I don't know what did happen there, but anyway, the Ukrainians, maybe they made few attempts of recon combats and so on, but they were spotted, were defeated, and they dropped their weapon and started running away. And the Russians, we can say, on their shoulders, entered and took control over very powerful, very important landfills in this area. And I believe that maybe Vremivka partly is under Russian control, maybe even entire Vremivka is under control. And as a result of those clashes, the Ukraine lost around 90 soldiers and 11 armored vehicles. If you are talking about Avdiivka, no changes, no updates from Pervomaiska. There is like clearing operation in this area. If we are talking about Bakhmut, there is no update, just like some flags. You see that the Russians put it some flag, that some pressing, destroying some checkpoints from the Ukrainian side, but no progress. There was a video how the Russians were using their Flauthammer systems in this area. So I believe that the Russians are storming Bakhmut very slowly, square by square, but anyway, they're not sitting on their like seats. If we're talking about the Liman bridgehead in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 120 soldiers and 30 armored vehicles. The Ukrainians did the same thing that they did the day before yesterday, and so on. They are trying to cross the Zherebets river, this one, but all their attempts were spotted by the Russians and they were defeated and they lost soldiers and armored vehicles. If you're talking about the Kupiansk front line, the same picture. The Ukrainians are trying to storm Kislavka, Yagodna, Orlyanska, the same towns, the same titles, the same area. No progress from the Ukrainian side. But today, the losses of Ukrainians weren't so big as they used to be in the past. The Ukrainians just lost around 30 soldiers and 6 armored vehicles. It was some kind of recon combat, I believe so. Also, we got a lot of updates from the west part of Ukraine. Today, we got report that the Russians attacked Brody near Lvov, and today the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost some Western types of weapons and so on, and all these updates, all these attacks were almost at the same time when we got report that Germany provided the Ukraine their air defense system. So maybe the Russians managed to destroy the Germany's air defense system. Who knows? But for now, there were no more updates about the real like losses and so on. And also the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they attacked Kiev and Kharkiv, and as a result of those attacks they destroyed few very important headquarters and they damaged the energy facilities of these two towns and the Ukraine as well. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.